Hello, it's an honor today to speak to you all as part of the Harvard Alumni Association annual meeting. Harvard has been instrumental in shaping me and my work as a poet, as the director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and indeed as a kind of accidental, or should I say lyrical, historian. I became a poet while at Harvard, or perhaps there I first became comfortable with the label. I've been writing poems well before then, since I was 12 or so, though it wasn't till I was away at school that I learned to print letterpress and to edit, to visit and love archives and use bookstores, to craft stories and poems, and to accept them as my own. But it was Louisiana, where both my parents are from, that birthed my work. Those rainy front porches are where I came to understand that poetry was not the ethereal or the effervescent, but the mud and red dirt, a homemade elegance. The poems I began writing in college and that formed my senior thesis that ended up becoming my first book, Most Way Home, were ones in which family was ever present, whether, as my dedication read, blood, adopted, imagined, or all three. Family took up residence in my poems as ancestors and ghosts, speaking to and through me, it felt at times. No wonder my second book was called To Repel Ghosts. There was rather a whiplash effect being in Cambridge, though, as I was quickly disavowed of the notion that everyone, or sometimes it felt anyone, had grown up as I had, the child of parents who were the first generation to go to college. Southern University, an HBCU or historically black college, where they met. This meant several things. One, that we ate like immigrants from an African-American South without shame, but with pride. And I tease my mother, who herself is now a Harvard alumni, listening in. Shout out to Dr. Azzy Young. I tease her that we ate okra for each meal. It also meant that my folks emphasized education as a great equalizer. One reason we might say it is too often denied. And that I emerged from an all-black context, not just in Louisiana, but also in Boston and Chicago, where we'd lived. Almost anywhere I'd lived in our moving about the nation, in each locale, a place where I had cousins and play cousins, the support of community and family, church folk and barbershop talk, food and music and familiarity. Getting to college, they had food, or what passed for food, yet little else was familiar in the trappings of the place. But I soon found the joy of those who felt like me, haunting the non-existent hallways of Canada D, who met at rallies or parties and then had our own. We marched, we danced, often in that order. I threw parties where I was the non-resident DJ and became a DJ on the radio station playing alternative R&B, a phrase that one wishes would have stuck in the culture, describing the ways I was free to play James Brown's Funky Drummer, or Chuck Brown's Go-Go, or Public Enemy, or The Poor Righteous Teachers, or De La Soul, or Kung Fu hip-hop heads The Fu-Schnickens, where I had permission to be brown and black and anything I wanted, a voice. So I had music and meaning, the things that helped me see what poetry could be. I also had some terrific teachers, including poets Lucy Brock Broido, and soon-to-be Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney, whom I would continue to know and later be responsible for part of his archive as a curator. I learned early the ways that the black country life I was writing about was one not unfamiliar to Heaney, at least in terms of the country or poetry. Indeed, that the high-head okra and sky-high yearning that I was writing about could be found in a different form in his Death of a Naturalist or North, or the poems from Seeing Things he'd read to us in Adam's house. These were also things I saw in the Louisiana where I went home to see. What I wanted to see was a world in which myth and my grandparents, their lives and beliefs and storying could not only belong, but be a song. I began to write things that felt as present as the world around me, only more so. I wanted, at least on the page, a context assumed black, in which the protagonist, often rendered as you, was black too. Being black by default is still both unusual and radical in a world whose newspapers, at least then, only identified the race of black people or people of color. What of a blackness that wasn't a blank, but didn't have to announce itself, not because it was ashamed, but because it was assumed? I found literary ancestors who'd felt the same way, almost accidentally. Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks, I later learned both had lived in Topeka, Kansas, where I had grown up in part, and they spoke of race in the way they spoke of reality and fantasy. Blackness was both a given and something sought. It was a home and a departure. This is a poem called The Preserving from that first book, Most Way Home. In it, a woman who is something like my mother is remembering, somewhat like my mother, is remembering a childhood. The Preserving. Summer meant peeling. Peaches, pears, July, all carved up. August was a tomato dropped in boiling water, my skin coming right off. And peas, Lord, after shelling all summer, if I never saw those green fingers again, it would be too soon. We'd also make wine, gather up those peach scraps, put them in jars, and let them turn. Trick was enough air. Eating something boiled each meal, my hair in coils by June 1st. Mama could barely reel me in from the red clay long enough to wrap my hair with string. So tight I couldn't think. But that was far easier to take care of. Lasted all summer like Ashenese. One Thanksgiving, while saying grace, we heard what sounded like a gunshot. Ran to the back porch to see peach glass everywhere. Reckon someone didn't give the jar enough room to breathe. The only good thing about them saving days was knowing they'd be over, that by Christmas, afternoons turned to cakes. Coconut yesterday, fruit cake today, fresh cushaw pie to start tomorrow. On Jesus' day, we'd go house to house, tasting each family's peach brandy. You know you could stand only so much. A taste. Time we weaved back, it had grown cold as war. Huddling home, clutching each other in our handed-down hand-me-downs. We felt we was dying like a late fire. We prayed those homemade spirits would warm most way home. The search was key. At Harvard, I read Toni Morrison for the first time and heard her lecture and read from Beloved. I took classes with black professors like civil rights giant Julian Bond and Nathan Huggins, who died during our class on race and pseudoscience, and Cara Olivia Haran, who taught me to teach and also how to be. Her class on black male writers we quickly and honorifically named RAP, after Professor Haran announced on the first day that she was leaving after that semester and was teaching hip-hop alongside Richard Wright and the other writers she had filled the syllabus with. More even than those official writers was the permission she gave us. I remember lectures on Roxanne as an epic cycle, and the visits of Public Enemy and Queen Latifah, who signed the Black Literary magazine I'd helped to revive. After founding another magazine my freshman year, a friend and I had relaunched Diaspora, the Journal of Black Art and Culture, and filled it with poems, stories, and essays of those we knew and those we got to know. I met the future author Colson Whitehead, and we became friends. We shared a style and a love of comics and bad movies and good words and so-so seafood. The journal published interviews with Angela Davis and assumed that music and food and talk were all part of the epic that we were making called Blackness. We were lucky that we found ourselves at the center of something we can look back on now and say was part of what some have called our current Black Renaissance. Members of our masthead went on to earn 2 Pulitzer Prizes, those are both Colson's, and one was a Pulitzer finalist in drama, 2 MacArthur Genius Grants, and even an Oscar. And that's just from the first issue. An issue I had Queen Latifah sign that's still on my shelf. We held readings, and even an office in Adam's house where I lived. We hung out, we argued, we listened. We made things, including friends, and many of us still are. I say all this to say that in my experience, if community is not around, it must be found or founded. African American Studies was long from its current revival, so we were our own ad hoc Black Studies program. Like the Dark Room Collective, which I joined around that same time, 30 odd years ago, we knew that blackness was everywhere, and as they say, everything. Which is not to say it was the only thing, but it was in our music, our dancing, our talk, our luck. Like the Dark Room's motto, ours might have been total life is what we want. Not that campus was always welcoming. Going to college in Boston was alienating and strange at times, and then there were the racist things folks would yell at you from passing cars. Once a month or so, I had to escape to Mattapan, taking the red line to the end to see my Aunt Lydia and Uncle Alvin to get some good food and talk. I had become an English major by default, too, almost, as African American Studies, one of the first Black Studies departments in the nation, had only one faculty member left. I had to find my way on my own, becoming an autodidact, self-taught though I was in school, with my junior paper later becoming the kernel of the Gray Album, my book about the blackness of blackness. I had also begun a project that took over 20 years, the poems that eventually became Ardency, a chronicle of the Amistad rebels. It was a book that I both had to write and knew I couldn't yet, one that told of our founding shame of slavery, about an incident I first heard of by reading the Amistad's letters in a book in Harvard bookstore, my other classroom. I was shocked I hadn't even heard of the case, much less been taught it, especially because, for me, it wasn't hard to imagine the cold that, as I later put it, catches us all the time, that the rebels thrown in New Haven jails must have felt, taught English and converted to theology by students from some school there. I was a cold I had come to know, though I had survived the blizzard of 78 in my snow pants. It was a cold no coat could cure. What must it have meant to be enslaved in a nation that claimed freedom? What must it have meant to have been a farmer who had then to take up arms against one's captors, and then to have promised to have to return to America, as they called it, the Amistads, in order to get home to all you've known? All we want is make us free, they wrote. Cinque, the leader of the rebellion, and his cohort, more eloquent than imaginable, in a language only now their own. Theirs was a map, one I already knew by instinct, but also had to learn to be as eloquent as they. In short, I became a lyrical historian, too. This is from the last section of the book, called Witness. It's from Ardency, and it's in the voice of a choir. This is choir evening. Sang against the storm and through, sang the warm rain and the cold, and our voices growing hoarse with wind. No talk of heaven, though we learnt that too upon the ocean. Blood that isn't kin, no supper to sang for, nothing but ration. Heaven ain't the end. Heaven begins the steady lifting. Things I don't have no word for, bones lining the ocean floor. Hush, child, the rain, my voice, all I carried. What would I have thought then, had I known that the Klan had burned a cross in the yard only 30 years before my time? Now, nearly 30 years after that, we still must say how recent that was, and ask how different was a cross from the racism of fellow white students who said aloud as African American Studies began to rebuild, we simply couldn't lower our standards. Was the Klan part of the standards? Would I have been more upset knowing that it had happened, or knowing that it hadn't been acknowledged? It would be the work of undergraduate reporters to free up this information recently, which I think important to mention if only to get past it. This is something I learned from the blues, to name pain in order to transcend it. It's how I view leadership, especially in a tumultuous time such as ours, one in which we all have to turn away from social media from time to time, one in which rest is revolutionary, one in which the things that have kept us apart are quite visible and literal. I wish to believe that we might transcend as well, but it requires admitting who we are and where we are. We are in need of a history reclaimed and fully explored, and of a lyrical leadership that, like a good poem does, makes unexpected connections, grows audiences, and allows meaning to emerge and also to soar. After all, ours is a precedented time. One thing I have learned by living in and leading archives and now museums is the way that not only are we living history and are living history, but that history speaks to the here and now, that we must listen to it and listen for it. We must speak with it and find in history a dance partner, one that, like a good poem, transcends nostalgia, but that understands it. One that keeps alive in memory things we didn't always understand or even know. The archive is alive. The museum and the university is made up of moments and memories, but also of silences that now speak. We must speak too, and let the objects tell the whole story of the past centuries and our own. Too often the story was and still is told as if there weren't silences, which hurts us all, especially hurting those whose stories and omissions commit many sins. It isn't that we didn't know of the Tulsa Massacre 100 years ago. It was that it was not enough told in our history by those who said only they could do the telling, with uprisings and massacres reduced to riots. The model of Black history isn't simply recording, but testifying, in the legal and the religious sense, of being called and calling out, of witnessing, which isn't just seeing, but also saying. Such witnessing wins out. Now, the Tulsa Massacre is the stuff of exhibits like our museums, testifying to destruction but also resilience. Today, such facts can even inspire horror and fantasies like The Watchmen and Lovecraft Country, or the beauty of Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad, instead of the other way around when, for too long, the facts of racial unrest and massacre were shaped or erased by fantasy or official denials. We must see, but also say. In doing so, we prepare not just the past, but ourselves for this moment. I see this in poetry, where Black poets have long insisted on writing of the world and not just of nature, of writing about nature from a Black perspective, of writing about whatever they want, being old and young and Black and woman. Quote, "Being property once myself," Lucille Clifton writes, "I have a feeling for it. That's why I can talk about environment. What wants to be a tree ought to be, he can be it." Or, as she puts in another poem, "Surely I am able to write poems celebrating grass." And then later in that same poem she says, "But why is there under that poem always an other poem?" It is this other poem we must listen for, this deeper story, this further music. In the case of the museum, it is a music that governs the spheres of influence, a metaphor for the Black culture that courses through our airwaves and internets, the African American story at the heart of the American experience, the Black people who have shaped the nation and made it a more perfect union. I am interested, as always, in the history of music and the music of history. What we can hope for is hope. I want to end with a poetic sequence, much of which takes part at Harvard, which also happens to talk about the history of music and Black life there. Like the hip-hop that inspires it, it is at times nostalgic, often elegiac, and celebrates the freedom I found there, but also mourns a loss of innocence and sometimes those loved ones, roommates, and others whom we've lost. It's called De La Soul is Dead, and it makes use of the interlinked sonnet sequence known as the crown to explore the lessons that link us. De La Soul is dead. A roller skating jam named Saturdays. We were Black then, not yet African American, so we danced every chance we could get. Thursday and Saturdays we'd chant, "The roof, the roof, the roof is on fire, we don't need no water," and folks' perms began to turn. We had begun to dread or wear locks anyway, our temples we'd fade. We said, "Word," and deaf said, "Dang," and down and fly. We gave no goodbyes, just "All right then," or bet. No one was dead yet. People who died. Jim Carroll Band. No one was dead yet. Not that some didn't try. Often friends of mine, these are people who died. Weekends drank too much, then broke into the pool and swam, though I was barely good at that. The bottom I never did touch. Home almost dried. We listened to the dawn or to Mr. Dobalina, Mr. Bob Dobalina. Glory, Halla Stupid, doused in eyeliner or lycra, and that was just the boys. Our favorite song was Noise. The scenario. The two of us, black, met one night, dancing alongside each other to tribe at a party in the world's smallest room. Someone from Carolina brought moonshine, and over the beat, the clanking heat, Philippe leaned over his date to say, "Hey man, we should be friends. What you know, yo?" And that was that. Popping the caps off brown, red-striped bottles with his teeth, he'd drink out the side of his mouth. Sly. We heads kept ours dreaded, crowned. A decade later, he was gone. The scenario, our favorite of 500 songs. When you were mine. Nothing passed us by. Baby, you're much too fast. In 1990, we had us an early 80s party. Nostalgic already, I dug out my best OPs and 2 polos, fluorescent, worn simultaneously, collar up, pretend preppy. When Blondie came on, Rapture, Be Pure, things really got going, and then the dancing got shut down by some square. What was sleep even for? Potholes in my lawn. This life. I confess we did look somewhat alike, Kenny and I, baby dreads, tortoise shells, tight fade. Though that night his giant white roommate drunk on 8-ball in the pool room called out, "Kenny, Kenny," even when I said, "I'm not him," and he began cursing me out. Quit pretending. That was too much. Doppelgangers. Unblood brothers, we should have done more with it, dressed as the other for Halloween, chanced an evil twin movie. No dice. Instead, we danced, side by side. 3 is the magic number. Twins to the rhythm. We danced as one does to the remix of 3 is the magic number. At a house party someone threw, just because. We were black then, about to be African American, so folks schoolhouse rocked and smurfed whenever we damn well pleased. We should have done more, or believed mon frere, mine own body double. Given the campus cops the slip whenever they quizzed or frisked us for studying while black. Kenny, I hope you're somewhere far from here, dancing away trouble. All that I got is you. Radio edit. Play it again. Soon all will be gone. The places I've known, Elsie's, the tasty, Tommy's lunch, replaced by lobster and prefix brunch. The cobbler one day disappears like the very word, cobbler. My dry cleanser now does shoe repair. 1 potato, 2 potato, that druggist I never went to, slowly. Every bookstore shut down or moved, Starr, McIntyre and Moore, put out like lights. After 180 years, we're closing our doors. Even the worst house, its food earning its name, I miss avoiding, proving yourself no more a tourist. If lucky, we leave not just a place, but a name, soon all gone. Tommy's, the tasty, Elsie's, me. The last day of our acquaintance. How late it would get. Every party was an after party. Some nights we'd even let ourselves forget that dawn would soon come. I do not want what I haven't got. Mostly it did. Sometimes the morn was met less alone, her beauty and scent, her buzzed head numbing your arm. Once you start, how can you quit all this remembering? We make love like memories, if lucky, and not too late. The choice is yours. Too late. The silence ours now sounds like the second when the music stops. Not for good, but for a breath or two. Engine number 9 on the New York Transit line. If my train jumps off the track, and now we're back up. Oh, how high we jump. Reaching for the sky, hurricane purple, and a night mostly black, dark blue, red. Nobody was dead yet. Thank you.